All right. Thanks everyone for joining. Welcome to the Indy Contributors Working Group call for November 19th, 2024. Today on the agenda, we have a discussion about the state of Indy and the future of Indy that was brought up by a conversation on the Indy quarterly report GitHub PR. If there's any additional time left, it would be great to hear about any Indy Besu updates or any trusted web updates. We're recording the call. We will post it on the meeting page later today. We're following the Linux Foundation antitrust policy and the LFDT code of conduct here. Let's see. If you'd like to put your name on the attendees list, that would be great. Let's see. Are there any announcements that anybody would like to give before we kick off the call, or any introductions? Anybody who's new to the call who would like to introduce themselves and talk about their interest in the space, feel free to hop off mute. All right. Looks like we are ready to kick things off. So just to give a quick summary for anyone who's not aware, Stephen wrote up the Indy quarterly report in the last couple of weeks. This report states that the project, excuse me. This report states that the project had a drop in activity from contributors over the past quarter. The work that happened was mainly on the Indy Besu initiative and Indy monitoring tools. But it also, of course, recognized that there are a number of scaled deployments of Indy in different places in the world. And since all are running smoothly and stably, there has been little demand for new features. Indy also had a mentorship project this year. On our next meeting in 2 weeks, we'll have Brian Ellie, who worked with Stephen and Sam and completed the Indy Read Replica project. So looking forward to hearing about that next week. Let's see, there was a PR created by Kim Ebert completing the update to Ubuntu 22.04. Over the past few months, that PR has not been approved or merged. And so the length of the time that PR has been sitting is what started that conversation that we're having now, and brought up the suggestion that perhaps the project should be moved to a dormant state. So that is kind of the baseline picture that we are working from now. So from here, I'd like to just open the floor to see whoever wants to share their thoughts about Indy.
I could go with a little bit of background on the TAC progress there. So I had put in I've been doing the Indy reports, the quarterly reports, the annual report in first quarter, and then the second and third quarter ones. My process there is to sort of take the old report, update it with my knowledge of what's going on, and then check with the community, make sure that I'm not missing anything or misrepresenting anything. I did that in the quarter 3 report, which I called up. I just, for reminder, looked at, said that our current plan was to focus on Ubuntu 22.04 release. The work is well underway. The plenum work had completed in the previous quarter, and that we were rinsing and repeating the dependency changes in Indy Node. So that was the progress mentioned. When I went to do the Q4 report, I was reminded that Kim Ebert did the work in July, but that we have not had any maintainers been able to get the time to complete that work. And that's what I put into the report, just said, since I wanted to keep the flow from each quarter, so that's what I put in. And of course, that's what raised the questions at the TAC. So that's how we got to this point. Um, the dormant state is one that I pushed hard to have included in the life cycle. There was a recent change and discussion review in the TAC over the states of a project, and I had just come through where the Ursa project went from whatever state it was in, I can't remember what, straight to archived. And I had just joined the TAC when that had been completed, and it was a real difficult thing because I had no warning of, as one of the users of Ursa, had no warning that it it was going to happen, and immediately had to scramble to try to extract out of Ursa the things that were very much still in use. I never did, because I wasn't involved at the time it was declared archived. I wasn't involved, but as a result, I pushed to have the dormant state added ahead of archiving. So the dormant state is effectively to say, hey, community, um, we are on the path. If nothing changes, we're on the path to archive this project, but it is in a state where somebody could step in, or a set of some groups could step in and help out and push it forward. And so that's what the dormant state means, which is it's a notice to the community that the current trajectory is that the project will eventually be archived, but that there is still time and opportunity to change that trajectory if people want to step up and keep it moving. Given Ursa was similar, but less visible. Indy is much more visible than Ursa was. That Ursa algorithms were the cryptographic algorithms, and they were very much in use in a number of projects. Indy itself is very much in production use and and being used by all sorts of folks around the world, but clearly nobody is spending a lot of time updating the code, maintaining the code, if you will. And as a result, we're in this state. So that's how we got to where we are and what the options are sort of for next steps with the TOC process or the tax process. I've suggested that I think it's still early to mark it dormant, but it be considered at the time of the annual report next quarter. With that said, maybe it is time. So it was suggested that we put a big warning on in a README, and if we do that, that's really comparable to saying that the project is in a dormant state. So that's the discussion we've got to have and get feedback from others on what they think we ought to do. With that, I open the floor to others.
So, I'm gonna chime in here because the PR was, I had planned on looking at the PR. I had already helped Kim get through the release of Indy Plenum, and was planning and still planning to do the same with Indy. Unfortunately, with project schedules, and I've been pulled in multiple different directions with a number of different projects and struggling with resourcing on those projects. I am still in the process of trying to offload a bunch of things on my end so that I can get to the PR and get this moving forward again. I've got support from the cybersecurity and digital trust team on the BC Gov side. I just need to get the same support from the courts projects that I'm working on as well, so that we can find the right resources to backfill some of the work that I've been doing on those projects. So that's all I can really say about that. Is I'm actively trying to get to this.
But that said, it's not very comforting that one resource is
No,
it,
it's not.
essentially, your lack of availability is caused this to pause. So who else is on the maintainers team that could take on this, and why is there not anyone else available, and that leads to what do we do?
I think it's been said a couple of different ways already, but just to reiterate, I think Indy is definitely a victim of its own success. Like it's been a really stable component of several different ecosystems, and people just don't have to pay a ton of attention to it because it's working as it needs to, and it's kind of taken for granted in a lot of ways, I think. Um, that being said, it does definitely require maintenance. Like there are things that need to be done in order to keep it moving forward, like the 2204 updates that Kim worked on. Um, I think going forward, Indicio would be willing to uh, push through some of these kinds of updates without feedback from other organizations. Um, I think it is the ideal still for multiple organizations to be involved in the review process of these PRs, since it's not just Indicio that depends on Indy, but in the case where resourcing is a challenge, I think Indicio would be willing to get somebody else, since Kim was the author of this PR, to get somebody else on the Indicio team involved in reviewing and providing feedback and then helping it get through the review process to completion. Is that something that the rest of the community would be okay with taking that direction?
I would be willing to support the project and provide any guidance that's necessary in that process.
Okay. Um, so Indicio is definitely, we don't want to see Indy enter a dormant state at this point. It is used in our production systems. We have multiple customers who are using it. We are very interested in other things that are going on in the digital identity space, such as the TDW and other efforts, but we foresee continuing to use Indy for years to come at this point. So we intend to keep it going, and to do whatever is required in order to return it to as healthy a state as possible, even while recognizing that it is a relatively stable component. Just performing the required maintenance to keep it in that state of maintained, at least, I guess. So in that vein, Indicio is planning to allocate more resources going forward to the project. Adam Burdett on my team is volunteering as tribute to spend at least a portion of his time um, with PR reviews and updates and helping to keep some of these efforts moving forward.
I think that's a good way to go. I think a lot of, for example, this PR, there's a bunch of testing involved and running through various scenarios. There's also just the review and looking at what was changed to make sure that nothing bad is being put in, and simply verifying that nothing bad is going in from an outside source is probably sufficient. We don't really have that mechanism in here, which says, I've reviewed this and I'm okay with it once somebody else approves it. I guess that's what could be done is, Wade, you could go as far as to literally look at the changes and make sure that you don't see anything malicious happening there. And I certainly don't expect that, but you know, that's what an outside resource outside of the one organization that's implementing it, and then having the testing done by somebody else and the verification. I think that would be a valuable way to go. Wait, do that much of a review, comment on the PR, saying once somebody else approves this, I'll approve it as well. Maybe that might be a way to go forward on this one.
Yep. Sounds like a plan.
Yeah, that sounds good to me as well, for what it's worth.
Hi, Catherine here from Quebec. I just want to mention that the Quebec team is on the line and we're communicating in the chat. So we're going to bring the situation to our relevant managers. And given that our production timeline is in the next few months, it's obviously in our interest to contribute further. So it's taken on in note and we'll get back once we have news.
Excellent. That'd be really good. I know Quebec's been doing contributions to the Indy node monitor and other components of Indy. So helping out here would be great.
Thank you.
Stephen, just following the train of thinking with the PRs, I'm wondering about the issues as well. So is that we've talked about sort of a lack of addressing the PRs or reviewing and approving PRs.
Yeah.
But is it also the, reviewing and addressing issues?
I mean, that comes back to there aren't many.
Okay.
Indy is exactly as Daniel said, stable, works. There's the odd there are actually fairly regular Discord comments and questions. Hey, I'm trying to spin this up. What do I do? And somebody, often Wade, chimes in with, hey, check out this, and you're likely hitting this, and everything's fine. And that is, there's a lot of work to run a network. A lot of it is governance versus technical. And so the technical side of Indy is extremely stable. And that's why, there's not a lot of work happening on it. It just works. The original implementers did a very, very good job.
And there's a lot more Indy instances out there than anybody really realizes. I mean, a lot of people are using this as their own private, they've got their own private instances running.
Yeah.
So Stephen, you mentioned the governance type of questions in the chat. Is that something that is better handled by different people versus the Indy maintainers?
What I was meaning by that is it's pretty easy technically to run an Indy network.
Yeah.
What I was just alluding to was the much harder part is to do it truly decentralized and have the different permissioned entities operating on it. Those questions don't come up as much because there's not a space for that. But that is what is the hardest part of running any sort of network like Indy. It's harder than the technical stuff because the technical stuff's done very well. Is all I was alluding to.
Okay.
Okay, so I think I go back to the TAC with the message from the Indy community that they want to, not would prefer not to see it go dormant this quarter at least, and to use this quarter to generate interest without flagging it as dormant, and that as is required by the TAC process, that when the annual report comes in 2025 Q1, so 3 months from now, that the question could be once again raised if necessary. Does that sound like the correct messaging that people would like to see?
Yes, from the Quebec side. Thank you, Stephen.
Okay, thank you. Daniel Bloom, I assume that works for you. I think I paraphrased what you said, so.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a quick question. Is it the TAC that ultimately decides what state where the Indy goes into?
So it's a combination. A project can recommend a state, and so and the TAC can agree to it, but as well the TAC can take action when they see it. And evidently, when Ursa was changed, that was a TAC-driven event. Again, I wasn't there, so I just sort of picked up the pieces after it had happened, but that was my understanding. But the TAC has the authority to transition them either by initiating some action or by responding to the project's requests themselves. Sean?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. On the Ursa history, that was actually driven by the maintainers, Mike and Brent, in the same way that staff at LFDT had reached out to project maintainers on Indy and Aries on other topics. We'd reached out to those two about the state of Ursa and Ursa's future and ongoing. And they had both said that they were unable to keep it going and that they could basically build off ramps for the folks who were relying on it. And I will say this just personally, like, we were so excited that the maintainers were trying to build off ramps that we didn't stop to say, let's slow down. And I think the concept of dormancy that Stephen and company put into the TAC governance, I think, is the right thing to do. We were very excited that Ursa was being shut down properly as opposed to being abandoned, that we didn't take into account the folks who had to live with that decision. And we have changed our own internal procedures for that. As far as the other point I wanted to ask, we've had a couple of Indy summits in the past. Is this something, Stephen, that we should bring to an Indy summit to see if other stakeholders who didn't make this call today, and this is the core group that I see on this call when I do make it, do we want to have this conversation about getting other folks who rely on Indy to talk about what they need and maybe where they can help?
Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
I don't want to make the people on this call feel like it's all on them, and at the same time, there are folks who rely on Indy who aren't represented, and I don't want to leave them out either.
Yeah,
but like I'm trying to be as open as I can with that.
Yeah, Sovereign took a fairly big role in the summits in the past, and obviously is going to take less of a role, given the state of where Sovereign is. So maybe the thing I can do is put out that we'd be glad to help in arranging a summit if somebody else would take the lead on it. We would use all the mechanisms that we used in the past to publish it and so on, but there's not a lot of time available in Sovereign to do that work. Does that make sense, John?
Makes sense. Let me talk to Dave and Rye and see if we can, LFDT can definitely help in regards to organizing and registration in Zoom rooms and stuff.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
this is definitely something that the community should be driving, at least from an agenda standpoint. Daniela, go ahead. Sorry, I keep talking.
No, you're saying all the right things. Hi, everyone. I told Sean that I would join just to listen in and see how we can be the most helpful here. One of the things that we can do, and I actually pulled all the use cases from our use case tracker, and intend on reaching out to organizations that I believe are still using Indy, who I don't think are active in the community. Folks like Wipro, for example, Dice ID is a very big project that, product that they have that leverages the UN. There's a Instant. There's a bunch of other companies, and Sean, I think doing a summit, a large summit, is great, but maybe also just starting with, hey, here's the next Indy contributor meeting. They would love for you to come and talk about how you're using Indy, right? People love talking about how they're, building products and what they have in the market. And then you all can have a discussion with the users and hook them into being, contributors, maintainers, and supporters of the project as well. Because my concern, and the reason I'm joining the call, because Stephen, I heard you right loud and clear at the tech, is that there are a lot of users that are just not active participants in the open source community, in the Indy open source community, that should have a voice, or at least should say, hey, we have real business and real revenue running on this, and make sure that they are involved. So that's my pledge to you all, that we'll do that based on the companies that we know are using Indy. But just be forewarned, I did look at the list, and some of them I know they're still on the tracker, and you all can look at the tracker and see what's missing, and who are no longer using Indy, that the tracker hasn't updated. So we do have some cleanup as well. I'm going to put the tracker into the chat if you all have not seen our tracker.
Sounds good.
And you can just sort. It's an Airtable. Unfortunately, the new website, it doesn't. You can just filter by different different filter contents, and I can't make a deep link. I apologize. So you just have to sort and filter by yourselves. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, thank you for sending that. That's a great idea, and I'll get into contact with those folks who could come to the Indie Contributors Call and talk about how they're using it and see how they could contribute. So thank you.
No problem. And Sean, if you can give me and the rest of the ecosystem team like 2 or 3 sentences with a link to the to the next meeting and stuff, or Shar, if you want to do that'd be great too. We'll go ahead and start inviting people.
Can do.
Sounds great. Thank you. Are there other thoughts that haven't been brought up yet that anybody has? All right, so it seems like it's an overall summary. Indicio and likely the Quebec team will put resources towards PR reviews. Wade on doing passovers on PRs to make sure there's nothing bad or unintended going into PRs. Stephen, thanks for bringing all of this this conversation to the TAC. And we will reach out to folks in the community who have use cases that use Indy and invite them to the call to talk about their use cases and see how they can contribute to the community. So, does anybody else have things that they want to bring up on this conversation?
One other thing that occurs to me, I just took a look at the pull requests and realized there are a handful of very, very old ones. Maybe one thing that the maintainers that are here could do is close off the ones that are just not going to move forward. There's a few that are just very, very old, and I wouldn't expect them to go forward. Is it worth closing those off?
I think doing an evaluation of each of those cases is probably important.
How recently was that done? Does anyone know? Wade, do you know?
No, I don't.
Okay. So, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I do know. I do know that I've talked to probably dozens of companies that are trying to set up
Yeah.
private instances. So
Yep.
Maybe it's helpful to share some of the names of those companies so we have a like a mailing list or something where we can reach out and make sure they're invited to meetings and
yeah,
invited to participate with them.
kind of wish I had that. In most cases, I don't. It's just been like community support.
As a side note, more of a logistical thing. So there's Indy network, or excuse me, there's Indy repos that are more on the network side, and then there's Indy repos that are more on like the tooling side. Um, I think I, for example, would be able to contribute more directly to like some of the tooling, like Indy VDR, for example. And I'm already on the Indy did method maintainer list currently. But like, I think we could go through and update maintainer lists on each of those repos, and that would help unblock some of these processes as well. I think just getting the maintainers updated to an accurate representation of who's involved and who's active right now.
There has been Rye did a recent pass to remove inactive. Inactive being anyone who has not done anything in, I believe it was a year. Might have been slightly less than a year, but anyway. So those are very much pretty close to accurate, if you will. I can give you, in case people aren't aware, I'll put in chat the file that contains the list of all the maintainers. So in that file, there's not a big overview. We've got a good one going into OWF that we can probably port back. But so in that file is a list of all of the repositories. And so any repository with the Indy name, Indy dash as the front, obviously is an Indy one. And then for each repository, there's a list of teams. And then at the top of the file are the members of each team. So that gives you the full, that gives you a relatively quick way of getting a picture of who's on the maintainer lists and so on. And then to add people to the maintainers list is coordinate within the Indy community by simply writing a PR that updates that file to add people. And get Indy maintainers to approve that PR so that then RAI has guidance to merge the PR. So hopefully that access control.yaml file is all that's needed for any updates, if anyone's missing from those.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sending those links. Is there anything else that anybody would like to bring up on the topic of the state of Indy? All right, in terms of other agenda items for today, it looks like Renata was not able to join, so we can wait till next meeting to hear about Indy Besu updates. Stephen, are there any DTW updates that you'd like to call out?
We are having an entertaining time with TDW in that somebody has claimed that the TDW term is a copyright infringement. And so we're having to deal with that. We are likely to be changing the name of the DID method, so heads up for that. On more constructive details, looks like we will have another version. We've got a couple of things that are being tweaked, and slight changes being made that are version changes that require an update to the version number. We're at point 0.4, version 04, and we'll probably update to 0.5 in the next little while. But other than that, things are moving forward with implementations, the trusted web server, and so on. So things move along there.
Awesome, that's good to hear. Are there ideas for what the new name will be?
I think WebL is the most likely,
Okay.
being weblog. SWL or SWEL, SWEL is a possibility, secure weblog. Couple of ones like that I think are being considered. Anything to get away from this ridiculousness we've got going on right now. We originally were just going to stick to it, but it's just not worth it for this character.
Yeah, that sounds frustrating.
When you're trying to do real things, it's very frustrating to have stuff like that happen.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that update. Let's see. Looks like that was everything on our agenda for the call today. A note that for our next meeting, Brian will present on read replicas, the Indy mentorship project. So thanks, Brian, for taking the time to do that, and we're looking forward to the presentation next meeting. Let's see. Are there any other topics? Any remaining thoughts that anyone would like to share before we close out the call?
No, I'd just like to, reiterate, and thank everyone for their contributions and their continued work. And if at any time you need me to come on this call, just let me know. I'm always happy to come.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this was a great discussion. Thank you everyone for taking the time to join. Thank you, Daniela, for joining, and I think we can go ahead and close it out, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.